Welcome to AskPsychSessions with Marianne Lloyd, where we ask some of the best teachers we know questions from you, our audience. If you have a question or an idea for a conversation, please visit bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. That's bit.ly/AskPsychSessions. All one word, all lowercase. And here's our next question.
Thanks so much for joining us today. My guest is Dr. Pooja Argarwal from the Berklee College of Music. Thanks for being here today, Pooja.
Oh, I am so excited. It's so odd to me, but I'm excited to talk about group projects. I really am.
And I can't wait for us to get there. But before we do, not everyone may have the pleasure of knowing you as I do. So could you tell our listeners a bit about who you are, what your PhD training is in, what you teach at Berklee, and a little bit about Berklee? The really dedicated listeners might remember that Dr. Erica Knowles, your colleague, spoke very early, I think one of my first releases for this series, but I don't expect people to memorize all institutional knowledge. So if you could just give some context, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Pooja Argarwal. I am a professor of psychology at the Berklee College of Music in Boston. So I'm not a musician. I get to teach psychology to musicians. And so there are a few nuances there. I'll say the first one is that you could think of Berklee like Juilliard, but cooler. I think that helps set an understanding of what it is. So we focus on pretty much only contemporary music, rock, pop, jazz, country, K-pop, Latin. That's what we focus on at Berklee. And we're in Boston, not associated with UC Berkeley. So I teach psychology at a music school, and my students can't major in psychology. So it's a bit unique. They can only major in music-related fields like performance or sound engineering. So they really take psychology classes as an elective or a distribution requirement, which means that I have a lot of flexibility in terms of what I teach and how I teach, which is helpful. And also, I received my PhD at Washington University in St. Louis. My PhD mentor was Roddy Roediger, and we focused a lot of work on retrieval practice that I know you, Marianne, and I have talked a lot about and have overlapping research interests.
Terrific. Thank you. I like that. Juilliard, but cooler. I haven't interviewed anyone from Juilliard yet, so we'll see what they say.
Well, and I don't know anyone at Juilliard, so I hope I don't get in trouble.
I think it'll be fine. So great. You previewed why I asked you to come on, although maybe we'll get to retrieval practice later because that's super important. But certainly every top 10 what employers want from psych majors or anyone in the world, one of them is working well with others. And so group projects are a way to have this happen. But I will admit that I have not been doing them because I know that I'm not doing a good job and students seem unhappy. And so I've just pivoted somewhere else. And I would love to change that. So if you could tell us a little bit about what you figured out that works well, I bet the listeners are all ears.
Well, I have been doing these. So I actually don't call them group projects. I call them lab projects or labs, which I find even that terminology to be helpful. And I started doing these pretty early on. I've been at Berklee now for 6 or 7 years, and have morphed and improved over time. I managed to sort of continue them during the pandemic, but it's much easier in person. My classes are about 20 to 25 students, and their so-called labs or their groups are about 4 to 5 students each. And each lab or group literally designs, conducts an experiment, collects data, and presents that throughout the course of our 15-week semester. And they design experiments typically related to cognitive psychology, learning and memory, positive psychology like exercise, meditation, well-being, and then social psych, stress, emotion, especially related to music, performance, and test anxiety. So they have a lot of flexibility and leeway about what the experiments look like. But that's the gist of what they do in these groups throughout the course of the semester. And as I mentioned, they're actually really exciting for me. And I've thought about how I break them down or how I think there are kind of 3 aspects that make them successful, at least for me in my classroom. One is the way I approach grading. A second feature is the way I approach the logistics. And a third is actually marketing, selling the idea to my students. And so the very first thing I do within the first week or two of the semester, I show students this meme. And I don't know how well this will get across over a podcast, but the meme says, when I die, I want the people I did group projects with to lower me into my grave so they can let me down one last time. So I'll say that again.
That is good.
Isn't it good? When I die, I want the people I did group projects with to lower me into my grave so they can let me down one last time.
Right. That hits exactly it, right? Like the I'm going to be disappointed by the choices of others. All right, yes. Great. You put it out there from the beginning. I like that.
I put it out there from the beginning. I talk about how much I hated group projects when I was a student. They hate group projects. So let's just not have group projects. And so I sell it from kind of the beginning and throughout the semester. And then the next things I tell them is that we don't have to meet outside of class. Number one, we do not have to meet outside of class for these projects. Number two, you are not responsible for students who are absent. They will not lower your grade. You're graded individually based on your own contributions. And the presentation at the end of the semester is worth only 7% of your grade. So if another student is absent, someone's just not pulling their weight, it's not going to affect your grade. You don't have to go through that hassle of meeting up outside of class. And so the flip side, everything for the projects happens during class. Students complete a Google form as an assignment during class. I grade them during class. So there's not even grading for me. As long as students are attending and contributing, great. Now, I will say in terms of the grading and logistics, if students are absent, especially right now with the pandemic or with flu or for any reason, students who are absent can still get a pretty good grade within reason. What they can do is they can read the Google form that students complete. They can read the confirmation, and then they have to importantly email me and their lab with 3 things, like what was cool that their lab came up with or talked about, what's something you want to know more about, and what is an idea or a question you have for your lab. And that way it demonstrates not just to me, but to the group or the lab that someone has caught up. They have read this Google form. They're in it. They're ready to contribute next time. So students feel comfortable with that. They're not weighed down by students who are absent. If students are absent, they can still contribute. What else? Each assignment, we break it down like every other week. We work on this during class. And these Google forms, maybe I can share them with you, or you can put them on a website or something. And these Google forms just sort of walk students through each typical step of an experiment. The first time we kind of dig in, students come up with a research question and a hypothesis. The second time, students come up with a design and a procedure. We talk about independent, dependent variables. Then they collect pilot data just from 1 or 2 participants, other college friends. They tweak their procedure during class. They collect kind of their final data. They have time in class to organize their data, then time in class to reflect and kind of create a conclusion. Then they have time in class to work on presentations, and those are kind of a unique style. And then they present in class. So everything is done in class, graded individually with like barely any grading for me.
And not repeating the same thing 25 times because you're doing at the group level. So there's no cumulative paper either. Do you feel like that helps with buy-in because you're not trying to rely on other people's writing? Yeah,
there's no paper. You're not relying on other people's writing. The Google Forms make it feel much more informal as well. I embed memes in my Google form. I really highlight that this is meant to be fun. I collected some quotes from students this semester, and one of them literally said that this is a fun adventure for them. Yeah. I think that's kind of nice. I also do have students who, of their own volition, choose to meet up outside of class. This blows my mind. They want to meet up outside of class to collect their data or to create materials. It's it's phenomenal. And I actually tell them, you really don't need to do that. I emphasize I don't want them to, and they still do.
It's like a strange rebellion. No, I must do more work.
Exactly.
Don't suppress my enthusiasm. That is great. They are collecting data from each other. Is that how you get them to get data without having to do it outside of class time?
No, that's the one thing. They do have to collect their data outside of class time, but they can do it individually. They can, create an experiment that involves a measurement of a questionnaire of some sort. So they could give that questionnaire. More and more recently, I've had students just create a Google form themselves. They can post it on their Instagram, and students fill out the Google form with embedded materials. Let's say it's to memorize a list of words or to watch a video and see if you notice any change detection. But for the most part, it's all online, and they just send it to friends or they ask friends to participate.
Now, I take it that you've been developing this over time. So do you happen to remember foolish errors of the past that you did? Because I'm guessing you didn't just start this completely well-formed way for the first time and it was amazing and the birds sang. So what are some good ideas I might think that I have right now? They're going to be like, no, try, don't do that.
Well, I'm sure that I imagine when I first approached this like a typical group project. Everyone had to be in class. The world looked very differently. 6 years ago, attendance was required. 6 years ago, I graded on participation until recently. So I imagine I used a lot of sort of typical or common approaches to group projects. And I think the more I broke down the assignments each week to only 2 to 5% of students' grades. They had weekly assignments in a variety of ways throughout the semester. So even these in-class Google Forms are 2 to 5% of their grade. So over time, I think I found ways to make the assignments more lower stakes. I continue every semester to sort of tweak and edit these Google Forms. And I make pretty good notes to myself. This question didn't make sense, or, I need to ask this question to check in. So this semester on a Google Form, I explicitly added how are things going for you on an individual form. So I make kind of those small tweaks over time. But I think the biggest change I made this semester was this kind of 3-paragraph essay, which isn't all that structured, and I'm not too, specific, like write 2 or 3 sentences per quote unquote paragraph. And I think I really liked that this semester because a number of students opted in to do that, to get a grade. So I think over time, like shifting the focus on attendance and participation to, it's helpful to be in class, but if you're absent, there's still other ways to do this. And more highlighting the individual grades has been really helpful.
And since you finish with a presentation, I also feel like that is a place where I don't do great sort of scaffolding and predicting. And they're sometimes, I don't know, not the most engaging, or it just sort of feels like you're like checking them off one at a time. So would you mind talking a little bit about the nature of these presentations and how you make them so that they feel like they're not just a giant block of PowerPoint text?
Yeah. Well, actually, I'll come back to that PowerPoint text in a second. I use a format called PsychSessions, and I'm not sure how familiar listeners might be. And Marianne, have you tried PsychSessions?
I have not, but I saw, I'm not going to pick because I feel like I'm between two names of who I saw give a talk about this at a virtual conference, and I'm going to get it wrong. So, but I only know it from that and from a friend that did like entrepreneur work in a small city in Ohio. So tell us about PsychSessions.
PsychSessions are intentionally brief and fast-paced and informal. According to Wikipedia, PsychSessions means chit-chat in Japanese. And I think, to go back to your previous question, earlier in like 6 years ago, I bet my group presentations more look like sort of the stale robotic presentations. And I've shifted to this PsychSessions format. And online, there's sort of different formats. But in my class, students get a blank Google slide template of 15 slides. and the slides auto advance every 30 seconds. So their presentation is only 7.5 minutes, followed by questions from the class. I phrase it as clarifying questions. So I or the class are like, wait, how many participants, or what was your independent variable, or why did you choose those materials? So there's the 7.5 minute Pecha Kucha, questions from the class, and then I have the lab presenting, create discussion questions in advance. So they then have, the lab presenting has to get the class involved in some questions and discussion. So it really ends up being at least 15 minutes of discussion, only on 7.5 minutes of the Pecha Kucha, or the presentation. With the 15 slides, it's literally just Google Slides with white, plain 15 slides, no text boxes, nothing. But that way I can kind of access and keep track of all the Pecha Kuchas I found if I set it up myself, instead of just asking students to create a file. And then I play them all from my laptop, which logistically is just easier too. So students, one of the main limitations is that they can put no more than 10 words per slide. Hard stop, no more than 10 words. If they want to include a meme with words, that counts toward the 10 words. If they want to try to get around it with a GIF, too bad, that counts as 10 words. Hyphenating words to make it shorter, no. I've had to work through all of these things with them. Do the words on the Y and X axis count? Yes, they do. So they get no more than 10 words. And I literally, I say no more than 10 words. And I love seeing the expressions from students' faces, which are like, wait, seriously? And I'm like, yes, my very next, sort of PowerPoint or presentation slide during this overview in class literally says, wait, no more than 10 words. I'm like, yes, no more than 10 words. And I encourage them to just put a picture. One picture per slide, maybe 2 or 3 pictures. I give them links to diverse image free access Creative Commons websites. And I've had students say that was the easiest presentation they've put together. And a student this semester said they're so used to formal presentations that this almost is harder for them to just have a picture on a slide. I had a lab group. They just had some of the Pecha Kuchas last week, and I had a lab group just put a picture of a dog on every slide, but they could remember what they wanted to talk about. Maybe it was a dog with a science beaker, or a dog with a pilot hat when they're talking about the pilot data, or a dog with a little graph so that it reminded them to talk about the results. And they auto advance every 30 seconds. I give students time to practice in class, which they really like. And I give my own Pecha Kucha demo. So I give one to them with just pictures, no more than 10 words per slide. So that's the one of the things that I think is really fun, where you said the PowerPoint text ad nauseum, it's only 10 words. And a lot of students don't put any words. They like that.
Great. And that answer is, I think, a nice segue, into the not official topic that I want to talk to you about, which is about your, I will say, terrific, having read it, book, powerful teaching, that is really nice examples of how we can take some of the finest lab findings in cognition that actually work in real classroom settings and implement them. So I hear you really with this assignment requiring students to do actual retrieval, right? It's not sitting on the screen. So can you maybe just tell the listeners a little bit, doesn't have to be a sales pitch. I don't want to put you on the sales pitch spot, but a little bit about what they might find if they read that book, that would be helpful for them. As someone that was converted, I did so much more retrieval practice this semester than I ever have. So thank you.
Thank you. I will say, actually, something you will not find in my book is group projects. I haven't written about my approach to this sort of lab project in Pecha Kucha yet. So you won't find that in my book. As you mentioned, Marianne, my book is full of cognitive psychology research from work I've done at WashU and work colleagues have done, and about what that means for applying it in the classroom. With these lab projects, well, let me back up. One thing I talk about in the book with retrieval practice is keeping it low stakes, keeping it quick. And some of the weekly assignments my students have is yet another Google form. So not in class, but outside of class, where I ask them, what's something cool you learned last week? what's something that stuck out to you about the reading? Watch this video. What topic was cool to you and why? Give me an example of the serial position effect in your life, stuff like that. And I also, on these weekly retrieval practice Google forms, ask students, what's something cool your lab talked about last week? Or what do you really like about your lab's design? So students are always retrieving information about their own lab project. And of course, during class discussion, the labs get to know what the other lab's experiments are. So I can ask my students, what do you remember from another lab's project that you thought was pretty cool? So that retrieval is kind of baked in even with these group or lab projects.
Excellent. My last item is a free-for-all retrieval attempt for you, which is that I try to leave space for my guests to talk about something that didn't come up in our conversation, but they think is important and or interesting for listeners. And I leave it pretty broad, although it's general. It's a teaching podcast, so people usually talk something about teaching. So it could be something you wish your colleagues knew or did, or you want people to email you with their ideas because you have a quandary. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Well, at least in terms of the group projects, I always think I'm a planner like you are, Marianne, and there's something particularly satisfying to me. I'd be curious about other listeners when my timing is like spot on. You know, when the lessons I have planned they just fit perfectly. It's very satisfying and rewarding when that happens to me. I'm not running out of material or running out of time or anything like that. So logistically, I would say that I found that this in-class lab project, each time we break down, 1 week when we do the hypothesis, the other week for the design, it takes about an hour of class time each time we work on it. My class periods are actually 50 minutes, 50. So sometimes I have to sort of encourage the students who are really brainstorming, like, nope, got to finish that Google form. But in general, it takes about an hour. So I just find that logistically helpful because I can always understand the concerns. Well, I don't have enough class time, or this sounds logistically difficult. That's something I talk a lot about in my book. And with these lab projects, I don't think it takes that much effort other than the Google Forms, which again, anyone's welcome to copy. I just need to organize them in some way. So they can email me for those. But it's only an hour. I give feedback in class. As long as I get their Google Forms, I go into our course platform and everyone gets full points.
Fantastic. Yeah. Sounds like a recipe for happiness. I will let you know. I'm going to think about my task for myself is my methods class, which is the thing I teach all the time, is much more based in not creating studies, but in learning how to read and interpret. But I think a lot of this could be moved into that space, and things that I'm spending time having them write and grade outside of class, maybe they could do in this, because I also like the idea of the community building that sounds like really happens from this as someone that's still very good friends with their stats and methods pal.
Exactly. Well, and I forgot to mention, I do this with my intro psych classes, but it would be really fun to see this with an upper level methods class, or I think the structure could work with intro or any upper level psych class. I really do. Without any papers, no exams, nothing like that. Just Google Forms in class.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time. I have been talking with Dr. Pooja Argarwal from the Berklee College of Music and the author of the book Powerful Teaching. Take care. Listeners, did today's episode make you realize you have a question you would like someone to answer? I would be happy to take it into consideration and find a guest that can help. But what I need you to do is head over to our Google form at bit.ly/AskPsychSessions.